Hey, we're at the repair bench today, and I'm just trying to wrap up this repair. It's for the saddle we talked about in our Monday video that had the real dirty cinch. We got the saddle cleaned and everything else. We got to looking at the stirrup leathers. This saddle's only about 4 or 5 years old, and got to looking at the stirrup leathers, and we've got a lot of wear right here. You can see where these holes have kind of boogered up right here where he's been riding it, and it also actually tore through. That's why you got to do a really good inspection when you're doing repair. Be sure to look at all of your danger points or all your safety points on that saddle. He tore this through, so that means that that sleeve had expanded, maybe gotten squashed at some point or bent, and it was too loose, and it did not keep those pins in the main body of that stirrup leather, and allowed it to kind of come in and out of those holes, the 2 pins, which in turn allowed it to rip through. That can be very dangerous as far as from a rider's perspective, because it can all come apart, and then of course they can fall off. So what we're going to do is we're going to bust this stirrup leather off of this fender here. We're going to have to bust the rivets out. I'll show you that, and cut the stitches, and then we've got some new stirrup leathers cut over here to length already. I just always measure the length of the stirrup leather that's in the saddle if you're doing repairs. We built this saddle, so I know what size they were when we put them in based on the fender length, so I went ahead and did that. I've got those cut over there. I'll show you those in just a second. Now, when it comes to taking the buckles off, I'm sure there's a few different ways that you go about doing this. The way I like to do them, the way we've always done them in the repair shop, is we always put our rivets in our fenders and stirrup leathers, the rivet going into the fender and the burr on the stirrup leather side, because we're going to be replacing the stirrup leather, so it doesn't matter if we damage the stirrup leather, we're replacing it. If you put them in the other way, you can chance damaging the fender leg when you're busting these out. So I always want to put them in that direction. Same thing on the top. The rivet's going in through the fender, and then your burr is on the stirrup leather side. Allows for easy replacement. But the first thing I like to do is we leave a little bit more meat on that when we clip it off before we burr down or peen down the burr. So I want to grind off and flatten out the top of this rivet here. If you can see that, there's a little knob on each one of these rivets above the burr. I want to go ahead and grind those off and make those smooth. You can do that with an angle grinder, or you can do it on a bench grinder. Just be very careful. You don't have to go until the burr flies out or anything like that. You just want to flatten these things down, because then we're going to drive them out with a drive tool, drive punch, and drive those out of there. So we're going to go ahead and go over to the bench grinder, and I'm going to grind all these, get them ready to punch out. All right, so we're here at the grinder. This is just a normal little bench grinder. We got a rock stone in there. Again, you want to be very careful. We're not trying to get too aggressive here, because it can, that grinder sometimes will jerk that out of your hands or something like that. So you want to be very careful. Like I said, you can do that with an angle grinder really easily. You want to be sure and wear safety glasses in case one of them burrs flies off. I have had them hit me in the face. So we just want to be real careful. And we're just going to grind, like I said, the tops or the burr side of these rivets. See, that's what we're doing right there. We're just kind of flattening all that out. Now, real quick, I want to mention, you can see how we're damaging the stirrup leather a little bit right here. If you get more aggressive, you can kind of grind down into the leather. That's why you don't want the burr on the fender side, because we're going to use the fender again. So, but here it doesn't matter on the stirrup leather, because we're going to replace it. So now we're here on the repair bench. This bench was in the shop that I bought whenever I first started apprenticing. This is a bench that I worked at quite a bit, doing repairs and stuff. But he had this aluminum plate made, and he had all these different size holes drilled through it. And that's for doing things like this, busting out rivets or different things, getting some, little tacks or something out of leather. You can put it over whatever size hole you need, and it'll kind of support the material, and you can drive whatever it is out of the material. And so I'm just going to use a little punch tool, a little drive punch tool, and I'm going to use this biggest hole here, and it's big enough for the head of that rivet to fit in. And what we'll do is we'll line that rivet head over that hole get right over the top of the center of the rivet, not the burr. And what I like to do on these stirrup leathers is I'll go down far enough, you can see how it's pushed that rivet up some, and I'll do that to each one so that the burr comes off. Because this is on top of the, or these rivets are through the Blevins buckle, and so sometimes it's hard to go all the way through the Blevins. So I'll push them down enough where I can get the burr. Once I get the burr off, then I can come in here and I can cut my stitches. If your stirrup leathers aren't stitched together, you won't have to worry about this part. We stitch ours together, so I'll cut that off. Make sure I got them all cut. And now I should be able to lift the stirrup leather off of there. So we've gotten that pulled off, and now you can see we've got quite a bit of rivet still sticking out of the actual Blevins buckle. And so now we'll take some horseshoe nippers, cut those off as flush as we can. And I like to just flatten them out just a bit. Right on top, I drive that through. Now there's a hole drilled through this hole here, through the bench, and I've got a little bucket down there that attempts to catch all the rivets when you do this. A lot of times it doesn't, but so they'll go all the way through the bench. If one gets stuck in there, you can kind of pull it out. As I save all those rivets, and just over a couple of years, you'd be surprised how many little buckets of bad rivets you got in a solid copper. You can take that to the scrapyard and be surprised what kind of money you can get, especially right now with how much copper is. So now we've got our Blevins buckle off. So now it's off, so now's a good time to kind of look at it. And if it looks okay, you know, a lot of times they'll have some wear marks up here at the top. I find usually it's just worth replacing them, unless they're really not that old and it was a freak deal that broke the stirrup leather. And these drive out really easy at the top of the fender. We cut this, cut all those stitches out, and now our stirrup leather is completely separate from our fender. So now what you want to do, if you want to take the time, is go ahead and pluck all these stitches. I won't bore you with that, but I'll go ahead and pluck all these, get all these out of here, and we'll sew these to the new stirrup leathers back in these same holes. And so we'll get the other one, I'll get those done later, and we'll get this other one busted out. Okay, so here we've got our stirrup leathers. I've cut these 59 inches. That's pretty standard for our standard fender length on this saddle. The fender length on this particular saddle is 18.5 inches. So we're going to cut the stirrup leathers 59. There's a really good diagram or chart there in the Al Stolman Encyclopedia of Saddle Making. I use that chart all the time. It's pretty right. I use the chart almost exactly the way it's set up as far as stirrup leather lengths based on fender length. But I subtract 1 inch. So on an 18.5 inch fender, that chart tells me 60 inches is how long these need to be. I cut them 59. So that's just kind of what we do in the shop. Another thing that I do is you'll see a lot of stirrup leathers where on the inside of the stirrup leather, they'll put a liner, much like you see here. Just a real thin piece. This is a piece of 3/4 ounce Herman oak. I've seen people use Latigo, thin down harness, just something like that, and it's usually on the inside of the stirrup leather just to cause or have a spot to where the buckle can wear that, and you can replace that, and it saves the main stirrup leather. I find that never to be the case. In all the repairs that we've done, very rarely have we been able to replace that piece and the stirrup leather still be good, or that it actually helps the stirrup leather whatsoever. Mainly what it ends up doing is the buckles don't penetrate. If you make that liner too thick, they don't go through the liner and into the stirrup leather or the bulk of the 13-15 ounce skirting leather. They end up riding on that liner, and then they rip through those holes in that liner, and then it just kind of becomes a problem. So I do not put a liner on the inside of my stirrup leathers. We used to never put one on at all, but over the past 6 or 8 years, I've started putting it on the outside of my stirrup leather. So the pins of the buckle will come in from the rough outside or the inside of the stirrup leather. And this piece here does nothing more than just try to give it some strength throughout these holes to keep them maybe from stretching quite as much after they're stitched in. But it also takes up some of the gap of that sleeve, and it makes everything nice and tight so that sleeve is secure between the pins and the stirrup leather. And so that's why we put one on the outside, and I think it looks nice, I think it looks professional, and it does offer a little bit more stability to the hole pattern in here to keep that stirrup leather from stretching out over time, or at least that's our hopes. So we put the liner on here, we've got them cut. We'll go ahead and go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew those little liner pieces on there real quick, and then we'll get this edged. Okay, so we've got our stirrup leathers sewn up here as far as these liners. Before we punch holes in these, I like to go ahead and just get a good oiling on these if we're doing a repair. If we're building new fenders and stirrup leathers, I oil all that after it's been put together later when we do the first oiling on the entire saddle. But on repairs, I like to go ahead and get these oiled because I've already kind of conditioned the fenders a little bit. So we'll go ahead and put these over on the oil bench and get those soaking up a little bit of oil. All right, so as you can see here, we've got quite a bit of tack and things hanging up, so we're going to move some of this stuff around. All these parts have been oiled and they're just sitting here kind of hanging out, and we'll come in and put some Skidmores on a lot of this stuff. The Skidmore's leather cream, you've seen our saddle cleaning video, that's what I use on as far as the conditioner, so we'll do that to the other pieces here in a little while. But for these stirrup leathers, I want to go ahead and get a good soaking of some oil on these. And I'm just using olive oil. You can use whatever oil you choose to use for repairs. Needs foot oil is fine. Vegetable oil, whatever you'd like to use. Okay, so our stirrup leathers have soaked up some oil. We might add a little bit more before we put them actually in the saddle, but we're going to go ahead and get these ready to put into the fenders. So what I'm going to do is I like to punch my holes. I use number 10 drive punches to make the holes for the pins, and I like to do those from the inside of the stirrup leather or from the rough outside, because the pins are going to come in from this direction, and so I want the little wider opening or the entry point of that drive punch to be on the inside. So I've made a jig here for all my stirrup leather use, and so for the whole pattern, so I just line this up, and we'll just go through here and trace off all the holes that I need in this stirrup leather. Now, if you don't have one of these jigs, or if you want to make one, a real simple way is to just take an actual buckle and then get you a little hammer and figure out where you want the first hole to be, and I'll just use my jig to mark that, but however far from the bottom you want your first hole, and then you can put that Blevins buckle on there, be sure it's centered, and then you can tap a hole right there and go all the way down and put all your holes. Then if you want half holes, which I like to have another set in the middle so we can do some micro adjustments, then you would just line up the very center distance between these two holes, line that buckle up, and then go on again. It's much easier though if you'll take the time to just do that one time, make yourself a jig like this, and then you've got your hole pattern made going forward. You don't have to try to guess at it. And if it's accurate, it will work. Maybe we'll work on making one of these as another acrylic template type jig for our website, but as of right now, I just suggest just using a piece of drop off of a stirrup leather and making you a jig. So now I've got all my holes marked, so we'll grab a drive punch and a mallet and we'll go to the clicker, and I like to punch these on the clicker, it's a lot easier. So like I said, I like punching these out just on my clicker bed just because I got more room to work than my little punch table, and so I usually just come back here and punch them out. I'm using just a number 10 drive punch there. I wouldn't go much bigger than that. I don't like the pins being in too big a hole where they can move, so we want to keep them nice and snug. You can also use a number 8 or 9. You might just have to make it a little bigger. So I've gotten to where number 10 works just about perfect. Okay, when I sew these up, like I said, mine are sewn, so I go ahead and sew them back in place, and I just line up and hold the stirrup leather and the fender together. And the stirrup leather goes on the inside of the fender. I just line this up. I haven't punched any holes for rivets yet or anything like that. I go ahead and just line this up, hold it in place, and we'll just sew this bottom leg of the fender right where it needs to be. Okay, so we've sewn the bottom end down here, and now what you want to do is you don't want to put your stirrup leather on and just sew this down flat, because this top end, you don't want to sew this top end down just with the stirrup leather flat like that, because what's going to happen is it's going to try to gain when you go to fold it, and you're going to create a lump in there. So what you want to do is anytime you put stirrup leathers in, whether they're new or used, is always bend this leg where it's going to go around the fender. Bend that over, and I usually do about a hand's width. So whatever width my hand is right there to the leg, that's about what I give it. I'll fold that over, hold that folded, so got it just like it's going to be in the saddle. That's going to take up any slack that's going to be in that radius whenever you put the stirrup on. So that's what we want to do. And then I just take and I just put a mark across my stirrup leather at the top of the fender. And that's going to ensure that when I'm at the sewing machine, I can line that up to that line, and I can sew that in place. And I'll know that I've got it correct, because you can see how this distance now is shorter than the fender is, but that's what you want so that when you fold it, they lay flat. So that's just kind of one thing to always remember, is to always bend that leg before you mark where you're going to sew the top of the fender. You don't want to make that mistake once, but just figured I'd mention it. So now we're at a sewing machine. I've got a mark where this is going to go, so I don't have to worry about it. We just line that up, put that in the machine, and like I said, you can glue all this together if you'd rather not try to fight it and hold it, but I've been doing it for quite a long time, and so I just hold mine. It's just easier. Okay, so our stirrup leather is now sewn to our fender. I'll get the other one sewn, and then we'll go ahead and put rivets and buckles in these, and they'll be ready to slip back in the saddle. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and replace the buckles in here. I'm going to go ahead and use new buckles just since we're already here, and I'm just going to take a number 5 hole punch, and now we'll punch our holes for our rivets straight through the stirrup leather there, through the fender, as well as on the top of the fender. And then we'll just slide our buckle in there. I like to slide mine in between the stirrup leather and the fender. Line up those holes. And we'll add our rivets. And again, remember, we're going to put our rivets in through the fender side. That way, when these have to be replaced again, we can grind out the stirrup leather side and not hurt our fender. So we'll just set these rivets. Now, I like to dome mine. You don't necessarily need to do this. I just think it looks a little professional. It also helps to prevent that rivet from pulling through. Put a couple rivets in the top here. And that fender and stirrup leather is ready to be put back in the saddle. Got our buckle on. You always want to be sure your pins are pointing out and come in from the back side of the fender. You'll see in some repair saddles where this goes on the inside, that is backwards. And I do not ever recommend doing that. The reason they do that on production saddles is so that they can make this super long to fit almost anybody, and the excess is inside. In the custom saddle world, you need to cut your fender to the length for the person that you're building the saddle for, and cut the stirrup leather to match that fender, so that whenever the person's riding this in the comfortable position of where he likes to ride or she likes to ride, you don't have a lot of excess tail hanging out of the bottom. But that Blevins buckle is designed to go in from the back. Stirrup leather is on the outside. It does not go on the inside of the fender. So now we'll go ahead and get this second one done real quick. Okay, so we got our stirrup leathers, our new stirrup leathers inside our old fenders there. We've got our Blevins buckles on there. We're ready to go. I am going to further condition these and things after I put them in, just to kind of make them match the rest of this. This saddle has already had Skidmore's leather cream put on it, so it's got a little different color. These have had a pretty good amount of oil, but I might let them sit for the rest of the afternoon and then oil them up some more while they're in there. I'm going to show you how to put these back in right quick. When you pull these out, for years when I learned, I was taught to punch a hole in the old stirrup leather right on the tip of this, and then we had a bunch of little pieces of parachute cord, and you would tie a piece of parachute cord onto here and then pull the stirrup leather all the way out, which that would bring that parachute cord over. You'd untie that and then just tie that in a knot, and so you'd have those two strings hanging out that run up in there. Then when you'd get this done, you punch another little hole, tie that cord on there, and then that would help you pull that back through. You can certainly do it that way. It is helpful. I got away from doing it that way years ago just because this is a little bit faster for me. It's just a little bit easier, especially on the saddles that we built, just the way we build them and the way we condition them. What I'm about to show you, the skirts are a little bit more pliable, so it works a lot better. But yes, you can do that. Just tie you a piece of parachute cord on there. When you pull them out, that'll trace through there, and you'll have a way of sliding them back into the saddle. But we're going to go ahead and put these back in. And the way I'm going to do that is, most of my benches have this piece of sheepskin up on top, and what that allows us to do is to take a saddle and set it up on the bench without scratching the saddle up, because when it's on its back, you're going to be on top of the swell and on top of the cantle, and you don't want to mar that up on a saddle. So we're going to throw this up there, and then that'll allow us to kind of get ready to put the stirrup leathers back in. Okay, so we've got our saddle on its back, as you can see, and you can see on this one how easily I can pull the skirts up right here. And so that stirrup leather will come out right there. And so what you want to do is be sure you got the correct side stirrup leather, and then you're just going to take the tip of that, and I like to just kind of give it a little curl right there. Then we're going to slide it up underneath the seat, up through the tree where it would normally go, and just push that up there. And as you can see, It pops right out right there. Sometimes you've got to get an awl and pop it through where it comes through the ground seat there, but it'll pop right out. Be sure you're on top of the tree bar and get it about where it needs to be. And then we can take this, and now we're going to go on the underside of the tree, between the tree and the skirt. Just with your fingers, just push that through. And then when it gets far enough down underneath there, you can pull it the rest of the way. And that's in. And then you can adjust where it needs to be and that sort of deal. And we'll flip it around and we'll put the other side in. So again, we're just going to kind of tease this just a little bit, just to get it to where it wants to come up and not hit that 10 strainer. Just coming out right there. Pull that up all the way. And then we'll drive it right back down between the seat and the skirts. And now those stirrup leathers are in. So on some saddles that haven't been well maintained or oiled, this area of the skirt may get a little stiff. It may be even sucked up real tight to the 10 strainer, and it's so hard, that leather's real hard, and you can't really turn it out to be able to get the stirrup leather up through there. You can certainly, there's usually a screw or a nail right here beneath the handhold opening there. You can pull those out, and then that should allow you to get a bar or a pry or something underneath there and pull this back enough to get that stirrup leather to make that turn. Saddles that haven't been maintained, haven't been oiled, haven't been taken care of, they're a lot harder to work on, and so it's just something you have to fight sometimes on older saddles. But that's about as far as I'll open them up. It usually is just right here is enough to get what you need through there. All right, guys, so that's replacing stirrup leathers. It's a very simple kind of straightforward project. You can make good money in the repair shop replacing stirrup leathers. You've got a little bit more invested in the job with either buying your stirrup leathers pre-cut or buying 13-15 ounce Herman Oak skirting to cut your own stirrup leathers. So it's a little bit more investment than, say, a clean oil and polish or something like that, but it's a very popular type repair, something that a lot of people need. There's not a lot of people out there doing it. So if you want to kind of offer another service to your customers, stirrup leathers are something very simple. You don't even have to open the saddle up. This saddle has been tore apart and disassembled for a cleaning. But if you weren't doing a cleaning on this saddle, I don't take anything off of them. I pull the stirrup leathers out, put new ones in, and we put them right back in, and the saddle goes out. So it's a pretty simple, pretty quick turnaround. You can actually turn these around usually in a day. Somebody drops it off, you can have it ready for them the next morning. So might consider that if you're doing some repairs. Don't be scared to try stirrup leathers. Biggest thing is be sure you use the right weight leather. You either want to buy your stirrup leathers from, say, Panhandle Leather out in Amarillo. They sell them pre-cut. They even sell some that are pre-punched with all the holes already in them and everything else. But just be sure you're using good heavy leather, like at least a 12-14 or a 13-15 preferably. And don't try to do stirrup leathers with something like a 9-10 ounce or something like that. It's far too thin and they're not going to last. They're going to stretch quite a bit. So I appreciate you guys. We'll see y'all in the next tip video.